This evening we'll do the chant on the Noble Eightfold Path, page 91. There's a couple of dedications. One is for a request from Jeannie Daskus for her friend Leslie Yamauchi, who was recently diagnosed with cancer. Request number 2, chanting request from Tanisabo for his uncle Jerry Robnett, who is currently hospitalized with a severe case of COVID.
This because it's called right action. puts forth effort, arouses energy, exerts his mind and strives. Arupananam kusalanam dhammanam upadaya. He awakens zeal for the arising of unarisen wholesome states. Chandam Chaneti Vayamati Viryam Arahati Chitam Paganhati Padahati. He puts forth effort, arouses energy, exerts his mind and strives. Upananam Kusalanam Dhammanam Titiya Asambhosaya Iyo Bhavaya Vepulaya Bhavanaya Haripuriya. He awakens zeal for the continuance, non-disappearance, strengthening, increase and fulfillment by development of arisen wholesome states. Chandam Chaneti Vayamati Viryam Arahati Chitam Paganhati Padahati. He puts forth effort, arouses energy, exerts his mind and strives. Ayam Bhutati Bhikkhave Samavayamo. This bhikkhus is called right effort. Katamacha Bhikkhave Samasati. And what bhikkhus is right mindfulness? Ida Bhikkhave Bhikkhu Kaye Kayamupasi Viharati. Here bhikkhus a bhikkhu abides, contemplating the body as a body. Atapi sampajano satima, ardent, fully aware and mindful. Vinaya loke avijja domanasa, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. Vedana suvedana nupasi viharati. He abides contemplating feelings as feelings. Atapi sampajano satima, ardent, fully aware and mindful. Vinaya loke avijja domanasa, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. Chitte chittarupasi viharati. He abides contemplating mind as mind. Atapi sampajano satima, ardent, fully aware and mindful. Vinaya loke avijja domanasa, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. Dhamme sudhammarupasi viharati. He abides contemplating mind objects as mind objects. Atapi sampajano satima, ardent, fully aware and mindful. Vinaya loke avijja domanasa, having put away covetousness and grief for the world. Ayam Bhutati Bhikkhave Sammasati. This bhikkhus is called right mindfulness. Gatamocha Bhikkhave Samma Samadhi. And what bhikkhus is right concentration? Ida Bhikkhave Bhikkhu. Here bhikkhus a bhikkhu. Viricheva kamehi. Quite secluded from sensual pleasures. Viricha kusalehi dhammehi. Secluded from unwholesome states. Savitakam savicharam vivekajam iti sukam patamam janam upasampaja viharati. Enters upon and abides in the first jhana, accompanied by applied and sustained thought, with rapture and pleasure born of seclusion. Vitaka vicharanam purasama, with a stilling of applied and sustained thought. Ajatam sampasadana jhanam upasamparjarihārati. He enters upon and abides in the third jhana, on account of which the noble ones announce, he has a pleasant abiding, with equanimity and is mindful. Sukha Satchapahana, with the abandoning of pleasure. Dukkha Satchapahana, and the abandoning of pain. Udeva Somana Sadomana Sana Akankama, with the previous disappearance of joy and grief. Adukam Asukam Upeka Sati Parisuddhim Jadukam Jhanam Upasamajariharati. He enters upon and abides in the fourth jhana, accompanied by neither pain nor pleasure, and purity of mindfulness due to equanimity. Ayam Bhujati Bhikkhave Samma Samadhi. This because is called right concentration. Ayam Eva Ariyo Atangiko Mago. This is the noble eightfold path.
take a brief bio break and come back for the evening Dhamma Talk.
Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhaṃ Dhammaṃ Sanghaṃ Namasami.
So it's the 24th of November, 2020, and we're approaching the halfway point of the first ever online Abhayagiri Thanksgiving retreat. And I'm kind of, really impressed. It really feels like there's all these people in the hall meditating. And during the meditation, I was thinking it really feels like I'm meditating with everybody. And even though all of you are in your homes, it really feels like we're all meditating together. And we are all meditating together. We're just really far apart, yet visibly close, I guess. So according to our tradition, when we give talks, we're instructed just to speak from the heart, not plan or prepare some sort of lecture when we give Dhamma talks in this tradition, in this lineage. But can't help but think about it beforehand. So. But then, of course, when the time comes for the talk, it's like, oh, where did it all go? So I asked permission from Ajahn Ñāṇiko, according to tradition, asking permission from the senior monk present. I would ask permission from Longpa if he was here, but he's gone to have a rest, and so asked permission from Ajahn Ñāṇiko then to give the Dhamma talk, and then the request was done in English, which was a pleasant surprise. I think that's the first time I've heard it done in English and received the actual request in English, and maybe we should start doing that. Maybe we can be open to that. We attempting to follow here the Dhamma path. It's an integrated path, so each path factor is joined with the other path factors. For example, we can't get right samadhi without right thought, right speech, and right action. All these things are connected. They're not disjointed from each other. They're conjoined, they're connected together. So we think of it as an integrated path. And the Noble Eightfold Path, so we have right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right
mindfulness, right concentration. And that can be summarized by Sila, Samadhi, Panya. That's a summary of the Noble Eightfold Path. And Sila being virtue, and so the virtue comes from, that's the right speech, right action, right livelihood. Samadhi, or a firm establishing of the heart, of the mind, that's like right intention, right effort. Right mindfulness, right concentration. Panya, that's right view, but also right concentration, right mindfulness. So there's some overlap there. So, Sila, Samadhi, Panya is the path. Sila is something that's important to be able to understand what it is, because it's not just precepts, it doesn't just refer to precepts. The word we use for precepts is sikkhapada, or training rules, training guidelines. But Sila is what the sikkhapada develop. So Sila is what comes into being based on the following of precepts. And Sila can be defined, one way to define it is the composure of the heart. So the composed heart is Sila. And that's a very nice way of thinking about it, a very beautiful way of thinking about it. But it comes into being from the following of these sikkhapada. So Sila itself is like a heart quality, virtue. And we work back. So when we think of Vinaya, that's the training of body and speech, and we work back to the mind from there. And when we think of Dhamma, that's the training of the mind. You could think of it as the virtue of the mind, and then that works forward into body and speech. So you could think of the entire Buddhist path, the entire training is the training of body, speech, and mind. So one way to think of the phrase threefold training is the Sila, Samadhi, Panya, and another way to think of the phrase threefold training is body, speech, and mind. So it's a very integrated approach. And none of these things are like commandments or like injunctions or judgments. So when the Buddha, quote unquote, judges something as good or bad, it's good if it leads to the ending of suffering, and it's bad if it leads to more suffering. That's how the Buddha judges things. So when he says holding precepts is good, it's not because you'll be judged as a good person by holding precepts. It's because the holding of precepts leads to happiness, ease, contentment, and well-being. And the living without principle, living without any sense of precepts, then that leads to an increase in confusion, bewilderment, suffering. And so it's not that if you lead a debauched lifestyle, you're going to be judged as a bad person, or other people will judge you in that way, but the Buddha's not going to judge you in that way. The Buddha's not going to say you're a bad person He's going to say that behavior is incorrect because it leads to suffering. But the choice is ours. The Buddha's laying it out. He's saying, this is how it is. You choose. You can choose. This is the path that leads to suffering. This is the path that leads to happiness. And you can choose. You can decide for yourself. We're all free to do that. And find that way of thinking. Sometimes just the right word can hit us in just the right way. There was one of the questions that Ajahn Krunadhammo didn't get to earlier. It was the very last question. It was addressed to me, and it was a follow-up on this jhana question, like, I got the first and second jhana, how do I get to the third jhana? And I'll just answer that question here. And I can say I wasn't confused by that question, but I wanted to make a certain point in that, in sort of questioning our own assumptions about our practice. And for my own understanding of what I believe the jhanas, the word jhana refers to, and we tend to shy away from this word. I can say right now in Longpo Cha, the Kruba Ajahns might use it sometimes, but will tend to shy away from using it just because it's such a misunderstood word, and there's so many different interpretations. I mean, you can just choose your teacher, choose your interpretation that you like of that word jhana. So Longpo Cha tended to use the word just peace and talk about the peaceful mind and not try to define the different levels that we might be in. And for my own understanding of what the word jhana refers to, I can't answer a question of how to get from second into third jhana because I don't have the experience. And so that's more a question for Longpo Pasano, and maybe he can address that in one of his talks. But I can speak broad brush in general terms that these are not ordinary states of happiness and ordinary states of ease and well-being that the Buddha is talking about. These are quite. There's a certain word that came to a certain vocabulary word that came to my mind earlier when I think of the word jhana, and it's escaping me now. Maybe it'll come back. But we don't really talk in our tradition using those terms, or like stages of awakening. We don't really talk about it so much, especially in reference to ourselves, for a couple reasons. One is in the Vinaya, one of our, say the bhikkhus have 227 sikkhapada, 227 precepts. There's different gradations of the precepts, like, for example, pachitya, it means that we have to just confess it or make it known, and then that's how we purify it or move on from there. So it's a pachitya offense to tell a conscious lie. So like if I tell a conscious lie and I realize it, a deliberate lie, I would tell somebody that I did that and confess it, and make it known and try to restrain in the future. But there's one type of conscious lie which is a parajika offense, and that's the worst possible, that's the heaviest possible offense, which means if I was to commit that offense, then I would automatically no longer be a monk and can't ordain again in this lifetime. And that's to tell a conscious lie of having attained a superior human attainment. The Pali is Uttari Manusa Dhamma, and the Buddha defines that I can give a summary of how the Buddha defines it as either falsely claiming a stage of awakening or falsely claiming the attainment of the jhanas. And so the Buddha classes the attainment of the jhanas as uttari manusadhamma, or like something that ordinary people don't experience. And of course, I'm not at all saying the person who asked the question is doing something like this. I'm only speaking this in terms of instruction or educating the group on these kind of things about our bhikkhu life and some of the precepts that we hold. But for me, that helps inform me of like what the Buddha's referring to here. That it's not a small matter. Also, the word jhana, it refers to something which it creates the heaviest possible good karma. It creates the heaviest possible good karma. So if we think of, and the way we can understand that is if we think of the heaviest possible bad karma that the Buddha talked about, and those are called the anantariya karmas. And again, if the group could just relate to this in terms of education, so I'm not making like sweeping statements, or I don't want to scare anybody by talking about this, but for educational purposes, and that's the 5 things never to be done, and that's because they have the heaviest possible consequence, and that is if one was to take the life of one's mother, take the life of one's father, take the life of an arahant, shed the blood of a Buddha. Apparently you can't kill a Buddha, but you can shed their blood. And then the 5th being to create a split in the Sangha, to create a split in the harmonious Sangha. And if one commits one of those 5, then the doors to the deathless are closed for that person, and they're guaranteed a rebirth in hell in their next life. And again, take that with, for those of you who rebirth isn't yet, like an idea that you want to take on, so this is just for educational purposes. So that's the heaviest possible bad karma actions that the Buddha spoke of that have negative consequences that can't be avoided. So on the flip side, the Buddha said that the jhanas are the opposite of that. They are the heaviest possible conditioned good karma that one can make, and it guarantees that the heart is going to rise up, and so it's that also helps me to understand what the Buddha is referring to when he talks about the jhanas. So in our tradition, we're just very careful with that word, and it really depends on the tradition that you've been practicing with. If it's been the Goenka Vipassana tradition or like the Burmese tradition, they might use those words a bit more easily or casually, and that's fine. In our tradition, in the Thai forest tradition, then we're more careful with those terms, and that's just our own style. That's just our own flavor, that we tend to not talk about these things so much, but just put our heads down, keep practicing. And these things might come up, say, in private with our teachers. We might quietly talk about these things, or ask about them, question our teachers about them, as this person has done in their question. But for myself, I'm not of the caliber where I could answer that type of question, because I do consider the jhanas to be something of very high caliber and not not just ordinary peace and well-being. So Ajahn Chah would say, like, peaceful. He would just talk about, do this, focus on the breath, focus on Buddho, meditate, keep the precepts, develop the sila, develop the composure of heart, and the mind will settle. So we talk about the settled mind, or the peaceful mind, the bright mind, the clear mind. And then somebody asked Luang Por Chah, how peaceful? How peaceful do I need to get it? And he said, peaceful enough to be able to let go. So he didn't say, like, Luang Por Chah was speaking more in broad brush terms in that sense. But with this integrated approach to the path, then we look at every factor. We don't just look at the meditation. So we look at the precepts, we look at the intentionality, and like right intention, is that there? How do we get angry easily, for example? If that's so, then let's look at that. Like, do we have thoughts of harming, thoughts of ill will, thoughts of sensuality? Again, it's not judging those things, but the Buddha is telling us that those things are a hindrance to the path, to meditation, ultimately to liberation. And the speech, how's the speech? How's the action? So, like, yes, there's the speech. The right speech is fourfold. So it's the refraining from telling lies. And most of us are probably pretty good with that. But then there's also the refraining from divisive speech. There's the refraining from harsh speech. And there's the refraining from idle chatter. So, like, divisive speech, that's defined as you take what one person said about another person, and you go and tell that other person, hey, do you know what so-and-so said about you? And with the intention to try to divide them. So that's divisive speech. Harsh speech is speech that is insulting, harsh, making fun of. If it's sarcastic in a way that might hurt somebody else, that would be harsh speech. Idle chatter, it's this is the difficult one for most people. It's like, well, don't we need idle chatter, like just to like hang out or whatever? And but the Buddha defined idle chatter as speech which is useless, speech which is pointless, and I think most of us could actually refrain from that, and it would be fine. Like, we can, when we're hanging out, we can talk about Dhamma, we can talk about how to cultivate right speech, we can talk about the path. Chanting, chanting falls within right speech. Reciting Dhamma. Even talking about the weather isn't necessarily pointless if it's going to be like, it has some use. So speech that has some usefulness wouldn't be idle chatter. But you can look at the Pali for idle chatter and kind of know what it's referring to. And the Pali is sambapalapa. So if you think of like speech that would sound like sambapalapa, then that's idle chatter. Or like right action, so not taking the life of living beings, not taking what is not given, i.e. stealing, not committing sexual misconduct, so like not cheating on one's partner. And those are foundational. These types of precepts are foundational for the practice. So how can we support each other in this? Like doing this online retreat, it's like we're all here. We can all see each other on the screen, and we're all supporting each other. That's super important, to have supports, Dhamma friends, like-minded companions on the path. That way, we're really going to make progress. We're really going to, when we're interested in the Buddha's teachings and we surround ourselves with others who are interested in the Buddha's teachings, then we can't not make progress. And sometimes there's kind of a shift that takes place in our lives as well. So like, when I was growing up, it's like I had really great friends. But then eventually, when I was going the wrong direction in life and then started questioning things deeply, and my mind started going in a different direction, and then I felt this kind of sense of loneliness, and my interests were sort of changing and shifting toward being interested in the Buddha's teachings, and I could see that the precepts and the practice would really help me with where I was at the time. And so there was this sense of kind of having to strike out on my own, but then, eventually finding Abhayagiri and coming here after writing to various Dhamma centers, and I was actually more interested in the Tibetan tradition in the beginning, but then finding this place, it really grabbed me. I was very taken with Abhayagiri when I first came here, when I first visited. So having these supports is very important. Or like if we want to do a lot of meditation, of course, as we all know, doing retreats is incredibly helpful. And you have the group energy there. It's more difficult to do if you don't have that group energy. So. So thinking of like Dhamma friends, how you can build up a relationship with your fellow meditator friends, and please bear with me for those of you who've heard me tell this story before, but being in 2017, getting the opportunity to do a long sitting retreat at the Bodhi tree in Bodh Gaya, India, with my friend, teacher, Ajahn Ñāṇiko, and he was encouraging me to try to sit for 10 hours a day, and we had this determination to do like a certain number of hours, which normally we wouldn't really recommend. Like the practice is a bit more fluid than that, but for certain periods of time, certain occasions, it's like, okay, we have this period of time, let's do a certain number of hours of meditation. So at that time we were trying to do a minimum of 10 hours of sitting meditation at the Bodhi tree, which I had never done before, so I was kind of scared. I'd meditated well over 10 hours a day, but it would always be a combination of sitting and walking meditation. And to just sit for 10 hours, I wasn't sure if I'd be able to do it. But something about the Bodhi tree, the feeling of the place, the energy of the place, and found I was able to do it. And then I started getting a bit kind of like confident with this. And so the way we were doing this was I had like this timer and there was a few of us sitting together. It was myself, Ajahn Ñāṇiko, a few other monks, lay people, nuns as well, from time to time, sitting next to the Mahabodhi Stupa, this monument that this stone image is a model of. Put that there to remind myself of the long sitting during this Thanksgiving retreat. And the Bodhi tree itself, it kind of wraps around the corner, and so we're sitting under one of the branches of the Bodhi tree for many hours a day. The complex, you can't be there 24 hours a day. It opens at 5 a.m. and closes at 9 p.m., so there's a limited time you can be there. And of course we're sitting silently with each other, but the timer would get paused if we had to have a bathroom break or have a drink of water or a juice or something, or if we did start talking and chatting, the timer would get paused and that wouldn't count as meditation time. But I found, okay, wow, I can do 10 hours of sitting. I didn't think I could do that. So I started getting quite confident, and the kind of group energy there, like, with Ajahn Ñāṇiko right with me, they're also doing 10 hours. So it's like, okay, let's do 11 hours. I want to do 11 hours. And I found I could do 11 hours. And then I said, let's do 12 hours. I want to do 12 hours. And so I couldn't get to 12 hours. So the timer, I kept getting to like 11 hours and 30 minutes. And then I couldn't get beyond that, partly because I had to stand up sometimes and stretch, and partly because the complex, they start shooing people out at about 8:45 p.m. And so it'd be like they'd start shooing people out as, I'm only at 11 hours and 30 minutes. But so I told Ajahn Ñāṇiko, I was like, I want to do 12 hours, but I don't know if I can do it. And it was difficult for other reasons. You sit for that long and the knees do start to hurt a bit. And so he said, okay, let's do it together. So then next day we decide, okay, like normally we would go at about 5:10 a.m. and get to our sit spots, and at about 7:15 or something we would do like maybe a 2.5 hour sit morning time, 7:15, 7:30, maybe between a 2 and a 2.5 hour sit, and then break for like a breakfast in the complex, sit more, break at 11 for a meal, usually quite a simple meal outside of the complex, go for a rest at our guest house, come back in the afternoon and do like another 5 hours. That would be our 10-hour day. So he said, well, okay, we'll just have a quick breakfast at our sit spot, and we'll just keep sitting, and then we'll rest. We won't take much of a rest after the meal time, and we'll just come straight back. So okay, so we did that, and then sitting through the afternoon, it was clear. It's like, oh wow, we're gonna make it to 12 hours, and we were next to each other, and just this for me is this sense of happiness, that like just this sense of accomplishment, and say the timer, it's like, okay, it's 10 hours, 11 hours, and it was getting later in the day, but it was clear we were going to have enough time to accomplish our goals. So then get to 11 hours and 30 minutes, and it started raining, and we're outside. You're not inside in this complex. So it started raining, and all of the pilgrims and all of the people around that are normally circumambulating the Mahabodhi Stupa and doing their chanting and pujas, they all left. And so Ajahn Ñāṇiko and I kind of looked at each other and looked at our timers, and then we just kept sitting in the rain, and then it was not heavy rain. It was just but it was like enough to get wet. And it's like, okay, well, there's only half an hour left. We have to do this. We have to keep sitting. And then I remember it got to 11 hours and 45 minutes, and it started raining hard. And everybody was gone. And we just looked at each other. And Ajahn Ñāṇiko said, "Mara." And then we just like looked back, and then we just sat in the rain. And robes just soaked, and it was just the two of us there, and everybody else had run for cover, and I had this feeling of just thinking back on it, like this is really what Dhamma companionship is all about. This is what Dhamma friends are all about, and I would not do this if and Ajahn Ñāṇiko probably wouldn't be doing this if we weren't here together, going through the same experience together. And then it got very quiet. It was just the rain, and you couldn't hear any chanting, you couldn't hear any talking of any other pilgrims around, and started thinking about how, wow, this is like Buddha Nusati. This is what the Buddha experienced. And when the Buddha came to sit under the Bodhi tree, there was no temple here. It was just a forest. There was nobody here. He was by himself, and got this feeling of piti, like the feeling of joy, coming up, and the rain wasn't a problem then, and then timer got to 12 hours. So then and of course, as these things usually happen, the rain stopped right at that moment, and we looked at each other and we just started like cheering for each other, like who cheers for like meditating? Like we were like hugging and cheering each other, and so for me, that's like a good story of Dhamma friendship, how incredibly supportive it can be, and what we can experience if we put effort into the practice. It's like the determination to meditate is incredibly wholesome determination. But it's very difficult to do if we're just on our own. So we need our friends, our Kalyana Mitta, to support us, encourage us, make sure we keep going with our determinations, make sure we stay on the path. So there's these key words we think of when we think of practice, this integrated approach to practice. The mind becomes clear, spacious, clean, mindful, aware, bright. And it's not just while we're meditating. This can happen at any time. It can happen when we're doing our morning chores, cleaning our shrine, cleaning our room, cleaning our dwelling place. This kind of activity, this is Dhamma activity. This keeps us with the Dhamma. So we make all of our activities, both meditation and non-meditation, into Dhamma activities. This is super important. Because when we do that, then we come back to meditate, and it's like a continuation. It's not my practice and then everything else. This is the integrated approach. The Noble Eightfold Path is the integrated path. So it's all connected. Yeah. If we just have our meditation practice separate from our life, and our life is not integrated into our meditation practice, then it's not really going to work. I remember first coming to Abhayagiri, and I was so inspired to be here, and made this determination that I'm just going to practice super hard, just like barely eating anything, got super skinny, super emaciated, Luang Por Pasano ended up having to tell me to eat more, because I had this idea like a yogi shouldn't eat much, and of course I just got really irritable and it wasn't working very well. And so after maybe my first month here, I was kind of, okay, get more in balance, like just eat enough. And I had this idea like, okay, I was sitting and walking meditation all the time and was really, really intent on Buddho, like I'm just gonna just like force the mind into jhana, into samadhi, just like bash the mind until it submits into the jhanas, and then I'll be enlightened. And then, who knows what. It's kind of funny sometimes the mental images that can come up when we think like that. I remember there was one monk, not here but elsewhere, who had the idea that he wanted to get enlightened so he could be an enlightened guitar player. And just kind of thinking like, what's the mental image that comes up with that? And but I had similar mental images coming up when I was first here, and so I was like kind of bashing away at the practice and meditating, laying down to sleep at night, and like meditating on Buddho. And when I would do that, it got to the point where I was newly in Anagarika, and it would happen many nights. This happened where suddenly my mind like went into this concentrated state, and it was like and then you'd be like floating in space experience, and definitely not in my body. And I got really excited about this. And so I was like really excited to tell Ajahn Pasano like what was happening, and I said, "Was that jhana?" And he said, "No." That was just a state of concentration. And, so that gave me this idea that actually there's a lot of concentrations that don't fall within, say, sama samadhi or right concentration. And curiously enough, those experiences completely stopped happening after I was in Anagarika. So I think it had something to do with like the change of like not keeping sila to keeping sila, not keeping precepts to keeping precepts. And then starting to develop the sila where I didn't have it before, and the mind just goes through all sorts of changes. I think that's how I would kind of explain that experience now. And realizing it wasn't about those kind of extreme experiences. It was more like learning over the years that with this integrated approach, there's a sense of settling. And at first it was like a heavenly state followed by a hellish state, followed by a heavenly state, followed by a hellish state. And I would be like really elated when I get into these heavenly states, and be like totally depressed, like just wanting to leave and wanting to whatever, just not do anything. And it would go up and down like that. And by the time I'd been a bhikkhu for a few years, I remember going to this Buddhist monastic gathering, and Luang Por Viradamo was visiting. And I always just really loved Luang Por V, and had, of course, met him several times because he would come and visit Abhayagiri regularly. But I hadn't seen him for a couple of years or so at that point, and he said, "Oh, hey, how's it going?" And I said, "Oh, it's not going very well." And he said, "Oh, well, why not?" And I said, "Well, when I first started practicing, it was like I had these amazing experiences, and now it's just like ordinary." And he's like, "Oh, that's good." He's like, now you're more peaceful. You're not going up and down like that. You're more peaceful." And I was like, "Yeah, but it's not as interesting. It's not as exciting. You want those kind of like extreme bliss experiences, even if it has to be followed by a hellish experience. It doesn't matter. You want the kind of the extremes. It's much more interesting. But now I can totally see that, yeah, so much better to be peaceful. That's even the kind of good states in the beginning there, it's like I don't actually perceive them as that good now, just because they were kind of like tainted, I guess, with like excitement and this kind of becoming excitement, I guess. And now there's much more a sense of this integrated and long enduring mind approach, where you want to do what you have to do to keep practicing. And like for example, I've had this thought a lot, like, okay, yeah, the mind doesn't settle into these really deep states of samadhi easily, and for some people it does. Like you hear about Ajahn Ñāṇiko, first time he ever meditated, like he was in 4th jhana or something. But say, like for myself, like with a mind that naturally thinks and wants to problem solve a lot, and it takes quite some time to settle. I've even had the thought, like, well, even if I don't get these really sama samadhi states until I'm 80 years old, that's still sooner than if I didn't practice. So with this integrated approach to practice, there's that idea, like, it doesn't actually matter. You just keep practicing, keep moving in the right direction. And everybody has to go from where they're at. And that's how we do it. That's how we practice. So roughly halfway point of the retreat, and I hope this Dhamma sharing has been helpful for you. And as we usually say with these Dhamma talks, if there was something that wasn't helpful or might have rubbed you the wrong way, then please set it aside, or maybe pick it up again later if that will be helpful. And whatever was helpful, please take it, make much of it. And I just want to say I'm very impressed with all the yogis being so committed from their homes and in this retreat and joining us in this way. And it's just amazing. From my perspective, I'm looking at this screen that has 25 squares on it, and we can cycle through the screens. I can go to the next screen here, and it says that there's 79 squares right now. Some of those squares have 2 or 3 people in them, and this is quite impressive. And usually I'm kind of against this technology stuff, and I came back from Thailand wondering, like, what's this huge TV doing here, and what are all these like live stream boxes doing here? And now I know what they're doing here. Now we're utilizing it fully. So this is wonderful, and I wish everybody well, and I will leave it there for this evening. We'll end with the reflection on the unconditioned, page 49.
Andamaya Nibbana Sutta Patam this unborn, this unoriginated, this uncreated,